Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about congressional behavior, so let's get right to it. So there are some very important influences on just exactly how congressmen behave. One trend that has been increasing in recent years is party polarization. And this is the idea that the two parties are getting further and further apart from each other ideologically, meaning that the Republican Party is becoming more conservative and the Democratic Party is becoming more liberal over time. So there are some important reasons for this. For instance, there have become more clear divisions on important issues. So I know we haven't talked about parties yet and ideology. That'll come in Units 4 and Unit 5. But for right now, things like abortion policy, for instance. Democrats are pretty strongly pro-choice, whereas the Republican Party is pretty strongly pro-life. There isn't a lot of room for compromise or negotiation on that kind of issue. So having clear issues where you're either on one side or the other, this has led to or helped contribute to this polarization between the parties. Now, there are some consequences of it as well. There's going to be a lot less compromise taking place. So it'll be tougher to get bills passed. There's going to be more opposition to legislation by the minority parties. They're going to try to prevent legislation from being passed. Additionally, confirmation hearings are going to be more contentious. So things like we saw with Donald Trump nominating Brett Kavanaugh for Supreme Court, and you saw the strong opposition by many of the Democrats trying to oppose that confirmation. So we'll also end up seeing fewer bills passed. We'll see more filibusters. In other words, things that lead to more division, slower, tougher to get things done. There's a term for that. It's called policy gridlock, where it is slow and difficult to get legislation passed. Similarly, we've also seen an increase in the instances of divided government. This is where the House, the Senate, and the White House are not all three controlled by the same party. And again, this will lead to it being tougher to pass legislation. We could see things like the Senate refusing, so the Senate was Republican at this time, Barack Obama, a Democrat, was president, and he nominated Merrick Garland to be a Supreme Court justice, and the Senate simply refused to hold confirmation hearings. They said, nope, it's an election year, President Obama, you're a lame duck, we'll wait until after the election to take up this issue. So had the Senate been controlled by Democrats, they obviously wouldn't have done that. They would have easily confirmed Obama's appointee. But because it was divided government, we saw this tough confirmation, in this case, no confirmation hearing at all, in fact, take place. Now, another thing to consider is that of congressional districts. So we know that there are 435 members of the House, so that means that there are 435 congressional districts. Now, how exactly do we end up with determining that California has 53, Florida has 27, and so on? Well, this is done every 10 years after the census, and there's something done called reapportionment. And this is where we change the number of seats that each state has in the House of Representatives based on population. So notice that it does not change the number of seats in the House. That number stays at 435. It's been there for a little over 100 years now. So that doesn't change. What does change is how many seats belong to each state. So if one state gains representation, that must mean that other states are losing. And you can notice on this map that you can see in the 2010 reapportionment how some states gained representation and how other states lost representation. Now, once this happens, we have another process that needs to take place, and that is known as congressional redistricting. This is talking about how we draw the maps for those congressional districts. So when Florida went from having 25 representatives to having 27 representatives, that means that they needed to draw a new map because their map before divided the state of Florida into 25 districts. Now it needed to divide the state of Florida into 27 districts. The state legislatures are in charge of doing this. So it is the job of state legislatures to redraw these maps. Again, they do this every 10 years after reapportionment has taken place, which is done after the census. Now you have two required Supreme Court cases that deal with the redrawing of congressional districts. One is Baker versus Carr and the other is Shaw versus Reno. Make sure you check out those videos to get all the information you need, but we're going to touch on just the most important things, just the holding in this video. So Baker versus Carr deals with the issue of malapportionment. Malapportionment is when you have two districts of very unequal size. So one district with, let's say, 1 million people who live there, and another with only 10,000. The reason this isn't allowed is because the people in the larger district, they are being underrepresented because there's only one representative for 1 million people, whereas the other district only has 10,000 people, but they have representation equal to that of the million, and that isn't fair. What the Supreme Court case in Baker versus Carr said is that that violates the one person, one vote principle, which means that everybody's votes should count equally. A specific tactic regarding redistricting that's important to consider is gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is drawing districts in extremely bizarre shapes. This is typically done to do things like support a political party, to protect incumbents, or it also has been done to increase minority representation. So one of the big questions is gerrymandering allowed? And the answer is yes, it is. So whereas malapportionment is not allowed, it is unconstitutional, gerrymandering is allowed, specifically partisan gerrymandering. So while gerrymandering is allowed, there are some restrictions on it. For instance, the lines of those districts must be contiguous, meaning that they must be touching or connected the entire time with no gaps. Another limit is that congressional districts cannot be redrawn to dilute or to weaken minority voting strength. And finally, there cannot be any racial gerrymandering, even if the districts are drawn to benefit minorities. And this was determined in the Supreme Court case Shaw versus Reno, which said that racial gerrymandering is unconstitutional. All right, our last thing we're going to consider in this video are 3 models of congressional representation. What we're trying to do here is answer the question, how does a congressman decide how to vote on a bill? Do they do what they personally think is best? Do they do what their constituents want? Or sometimes do they do what they think is best and at other times do what their constituents want? How do they decide? Well, the first model is known as the trustee model of representation. And this means that the congressman will do what they think is best personally, regardless of what their constituents want. By the way, that word constituent, it's an important word because you're going to see it a lot on test questions. You're going to hear me say it a lot. That's talking about the people being represented. So a representative represents a district. The people who live in that district, that is that representative's constituents. They could also choose to be a delegate. The delegate model means that they do what the constituents want, even if they disagree. So again, trustee, they go by their own personal opinion. Delegate, they go by what the public opinion of their constituents. Politico is sometimes they do act as a trustee, at other times they act as a delegate. So sometimes they follow their own opinion, at other times they follow public opinion. Well, why would a representative sometimes act as a delegate and at other times as a trustee? Well, this can come down to when we are in the election cycle. The closer we are to an election, the more likely they are to act as a delegate because they want to get reelected. So they are more likely to follow public opinion. So this means that representatives are more likely to follow public opinion than senators because, again, they have that 2-year term, which means that they are up for election more often, so they are more closely confined to public opinion than senators are. Alright guys, so that's it for another video. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, this has been a La Money production. Alright, thanks again for watching this video. If it helped you, do me a favor, hit that like button so I can spread these videos to other Gov students. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you guys next time.